The Broken Séance Circle in Lilydale, New York. Chapter 1. Whispers of the past. The sun was setting over Lilydale, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the facade of the old 1800s mansion. Its once grand exterior, now weathered by time, stood as a silent testament to the countless stories it held within its walls. The mansion, with its towering spires and intricate carvings, had an air of faded grandeur. Ivy crept up its stone walls, and the windows, some broken, some boarded up, reflected the crimson hues of the setting sun. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, the mansion seemed to come alive. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of voices from the past. It was said that on nights like these, if one listened closely, they could hear the soft murmurs of spirits long gone. Inside the mansion, candles flickered, casting a soft glow over the ornate furniture and portraits of people who once called this place home. In the center of the grand hall stood a large wooden table, set with crystal glasses and fine china. But this was no ordinary dinner gathering. This was a séance, and the guests were about to embark on a journey to the other side. At the head of the table sat Madame Florence Raymount, a woman of undeniable presence. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through you. She wore a long black dress, its fabric shimmering in the candlelight, and around her neck hung a pendant with a single, glowing stone. Madame Raymount was no ordinary woman. She was a renowned psychic medium, known far and wide for her ability to communicate with the dead. But even she was wary of the spirits that resided in this mansion. For this was her ancestral home, and she knew all too well the dark secrets it held. As the guests took their seats, Madame Raymount began to speak. "Welcome, my dear friends, to a night that promises to be unlike any other. Tonight, we will attempt to pierce the veil between the living and the dead, to communicate with those who have passed on." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the guests. "But I must warn you, this mansion has a history. Many séances have been held here, and not all have ended well. The spirits that reside here are restless, and they do not take kindly to intruders." A murmur of unease rippled through the guests. They had all heard the stories. Tales of apparitions that roamed the halls, of voices that whispered in the dead of night, of objects that moved on their own. But the allure of the unknown, the promise of a glimpse into the afterlife, was too strong to resist. Madame Raymount continued, "This mansion has been in my family for generations. And with it, a legacy of spiritualism. My ancestors were known to hold séances, to communicate with the other side. But over the years, something changed. The spirits became more malevolent, more restless. And that's when the hauntings began." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are spirits here that do not wish to be disturbed. Spirits that hold grudges, that seek revenge. And tonight, we tread on their territory." The room was silent, the tension palpable. The only sound was the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if they had made a grave mistake in coming here. Madame Raymount took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the flickering candles. "But fear not, for I am here to guide you. Together, we will navigate the treacherous waters of the spirit world. But I must ask you to follow my instructions to the letter. For if we break the circle, if we let our guard down, we risk unleashing forces beyond our control." As she spoke, the wind outside picked up, rattling the windows and causing the candles to flicker wildly. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, charged with anticipation. The guests gripped the edges of the table, their knuckles white, as they prepared to embark on a journey into the unknown. And as the clock struck midnight, the séance began. The room was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the candles on the table. Madame Raymount began to chant, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. The air grew cold, and a sense of foreboding settled over the room. And then, slowly, the table began to move. It started with a gentle rocking, back and forth, before escalating into a violent shaking. The guests gasped, their eyes wide with fear, as they felt an unseen force take hold. Madame Raymount's voice grew louder, more urgent, as she called out to the spirits. "We come in peace," she intoned. "We seek only to communicate, to understand." But the spirits had other plans. The room was filled with a cacophony of voices, each more anguished than the last. They spoke of betrayal, of unfinished business, of a desire for revenge. And as the night wore on, it became clear that this séance was unlike any other. For the spirits of the mansion were not content to simply communicate. They sought to make their presence known, to leave their mark on the living. And as dawn broke, the guests emerged from the mansion, forever changed by the events of that fateful night. For they had come face to face with the unknown, with the spirits that roamed the halls of the old mansion in Lily Dale. And they would never forget the night they spent in the company of the dead. Chapter 2. Echoes of intent. The gravel crunched under the wheels of carriages as they made their way up the winding path to the mansion. One by one, the guests disembarked, their eyes taking in the imposing structure before them. The mansion, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, seemed to watch them, its windows like countless eyes peering into their souls. First to arrive was Clarence, stepping out with an air of confidence. He was a tall man, his sharp jawline accentuated by a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes, however, betrayed a hint of skepticism. Dressed in a tailored suit, he looked every bit the modern journalist he was. He had come to the séance not in search of spirits, but of a story. The tales of hauntings and apparitions were, to him, nothing more than superstitions, and he was determined to debunk them. Following Clarence was Beatrice, a stark contrast in her demeanor. She was a vision of sorrow, her raven-black hair cascading down her back, contrasting with her pale skin. Dressed in a black gown, she clutched a locket tightly in her hand. It was said that the locket contained a picture of her late husband, and she had come to the séance in the hopes of communicating with him one last time. Jasper was next, his stout frame and balding head making him stand out. He was a historian, his life dedicated to uncovering the past. The mansion, with its rich history, had always fascinated him. He had heard tales of the séances held here, of the spirits that roamed its halls, and he was eager to experience it for himself. Lastly, there was Lillian, the youngest of the group. With her curly blonde hair and innocent eyes, she looked out of place amidst the grandeur of the mansion. She had come to the séance out of sheer curiosity, having heard tales of the supernatural from her grandmother. As the guests made their way inside, they were greeted by Madame Raymount. "Welcome," she said, her voice echoing through the grand hall. "I hope your journey was pleasant." The guests exchanged pleasantries, their voices filling the room. But beneath the surface, there was a palpable tension. Each guest had come to the séance with their own intentions, their own desires, and as they took their seats around the table, they sized each other up, wondering what the night had in store for them. Clarence, ever the skeptic, was the first to speak. "I must admit, Madame Raymount, this is quite the setup you have here," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I've heard tales of your séances, of the spirits you claim to communicate with. I'm eager to see it for myself. Madame Raymount met his gaze, her eyes unflinching. I assure you, Mr. Clarence, the spirits are very real, she replied. And they do not take kindly to doubters. Beatrice, her voice trembling, spoke up. I just want to speak to him one last time, she whispered. To hear his voice, to know that he's at peace. Jasper, ever the historian, was more interested in the mansion itself. This place has such a rich history, he mused. I've heard tales of the séances held here, of the spirits that reside within these walls. I'm eager to experience it for myself. Lillian, meanwhile, looked around in awe. This place is incredible, she exclaimed. I've never seen anything like it. As the guests settled in, the atmosphere in the room grew heavy. The mansion seemed to come alive, its walls whispering tales of the past. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and the guests could feel the weight of the spirits around them. Madame Raymount, sensing the unease in the room, spoke up. The spirits are restless tonight, she said. They can sense your presence, your intentions. I must ask you all to be respectful, to keep an open mind. For the spirits do not take kindly to intruders. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Madame Raymount's words sinking in. They had come to the séance seeking answers, seeking closure. But as the night wore on, they would come to realize that some things are better left undisturbed. And as the clock struck midnight, the séance began, the guests embarking on a journey into the unknown, a journey that would change their lives forever. Chapter 3. Whispers in the dark. The grand hall, once echoing with the chatter of guests, now lay in hushed anticipation. The only light emanated from a circle of candles, their flames dancing as if in rhythm with some unseen force. In the center of this circle stood a polished wooden table, its surface gleaming in the dim light. Around it, the guests took their positions, their faces a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and fear. Madame Raymount, her figure illuminated by the candlelight, began the ritual. We are here to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, she began, her voice steady and commanding. To reach out to those who have passed on and seek their wisdom. She motioned for the guests to join hands, forming an unbroken circle. It is of utmost importance that we maintain this connection, she warned. The circle is our protection, our anchor to this realm. Should it be broken, we risk unleashing forces we cannot control. The guests nodded, their grips tightening on each other's hands. Even Clarence, the skeptic, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, his usual smirk replaced by a look of concentration. Madame Raymount closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Focus your energy, your thoughts, she instructed. Picture the one you wish to communicate with. Send them your love, your longing. The room grew colder, the air thick with anticipation. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then, slowly, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely audible. But as the minutes passed, they grew louder, more distinct. Voices from the past, reaching out from the other side. Beatrice, her eyes filled with tears, recognized the voice of her late husband. Is that you? She whispered, her voice trembling. Can you hear me? Jasper, the historian, heard voices from the mansion's past, tales of love and loss, joy and sorrow. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, eager to document this unprecedented experience. Clarence, the skeptic, looked around in disbelief. This can't be real, he muttered. It's just a trick, some sort of illusion. But Lillian, the young and curious one, seemed the most affected. Her face had turned pale, her eyes wide with fear. She seemed to recognize one of the voices, a voice from her past. A voice she had hoped never to hear again. Madame Raymount, sensing the growing unease in the room, spoke up. "Stay calm," she urged. "Focus on the circle, on our connection. Do not let the voices overwhelm you." But as the minutes turned into hours, the voices grew more insistent, more demanding. They spoke of unfinished business, of wrongs that needed to be righted. And as the intensity grew, so did the tension in the room. Lillian, her face a mask of terror, began to tremble. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to get out of here." Madame Raymount, sensing the danger, reached out to her. "Stay with us," she pleaded. "Do not break the circle." But it was too late. Lillian, overcome with fear, pulled her hand away, breaking the connection. The room was plunged into darkness, the candles snuffed out by an unseen force. The voices, once distant and faint, now echoed loudly, their anger palpable. Madame Raymount, her voice filled with urgency, shouted, "Form the circle. We need to close the portal." But the chaos had already begun. Objects flew across the room, windows shattered, and the temperature dropped to near freezing. The guests, their faces filled with terror, scrambled to find each other in the darkness. And as the night wore on, it became clear that this séance was unlike any other. For the spirits of the mansion had been awakened, and they were not happy. As dawn broke, the guests emerged from the mansion, forever changed by the events of that fateful night. They had come seeking answers, seeking closure. But what they found was a glimpse into the unknown, a journey into the heart of darkness. And as they made their way down the winding path, the mansion loomed behind them, its windows watching, its walls whispering. For the spirits of the mansion were restless, and they would not be silenced. Chapter 4. The Fractured Veil, the Séance, which began as a harmonious communion between the living and the departed, was now teetering on the edge of chaos. The room, once filled with the soft glow of candles and the rhythmic chanting of Madame Raymount, was now thick with tension. The voices from the other side grew more insistent, their messages a cacophony of emotions. Lillian, the youngest of the group, had been visibly shaken since the beginning. The voice she recognized from her past had rattled her, and as the séance progressed, her discomfort grew. Her eyes darted around the room, her grip on the hands beside her growing sweaty and weak. As Madame Raymount channeled the spirits, urging them to communicate their messages clearly, a sudden gust of wind blew through the room. The heavy drapes billowed, and a window, previously latched, swung open with a loud creak. The candles flickered, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. This sudden intrusion was the moment of distraction Lillian had unknowingly been waiting for. Overwhelmed and desperate for escape, she pulled her hand away from the circle, breaking the connection. The room plunged into an oppressive silence, the weight of the broken circle pressing down on everyone present. Almost instantly, the temperature in the room plummeted. The guests could see their breath, and a thin layer of frost began to form on the windows. The once steady candles now flickered wildly, some snuffing out, leaving parts of the room in complete darkness. Madame Raymount's eyes snapped open, her piercing gaze immediately finding Lillian. "No!" she exclaimed, her voice echoing with a mix of fear and anger. The circle must never be broken. But the damage was done. The spirits, once held at bay by the protective circle, now sensed an opportunity. The room was filled with a cacophony of sounds, soft whispers, anguished cries, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Madame Raymount, ever the professional, tried to salvage the situation. "Quickly, reform the circle," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We must close the portal before it's too late." The guests, their faces pale with fear, scrambled to obey. They reached out, their hands desperately seeking the comfort and protection of the circle. But the spirits were not going to be easily appeased. Objects began to levitate, hovering in the air before being hurled across the room. Portraits on the walls shook violently, their eyes seeming to follow the guests. And the voices, once distant and faint, now echoed loudly, their anger palpable. Lillian, realizing the gravity of her mistake, began to sob. "I'm sorry," she cried, her voice barely audible over the din. "I didn't mean to. ... But her apology was cut short as a cold hand gripped her shoulder, pulling her back. She screamed, her eyes wide with terror, as she was dragged towards the open window. Madame Raymount, her face a mask of determination, began to chant, her voice rising above the chaos. She reached out, her fingers brushing Lillian's, pulling her back from the brink. The two women collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The room, once filled with the sounds of the spirit's displeasure, now lay in silence. The portal, once wide open, was now closed, the spirits banished back to the other side. The guests, their faces pale and drawn, looked around in disbelief. The séance, which began as a journey into the unknown, had turned into a nightmare. Madame Raymount, her energy spent, looked up at the guests. "The circle," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "must never be broken." And as the guests made their way out of the mansion, they knew that they had come face to face with the unknown, with the spirits that roamed its halls. And they would never forget the night they broke the circle. Chapter 5. The voice within the aftermath of the broken circle was palpable. The grand hall, which had been a sanctuary of spiritual communication, now felt like a battleground. The guests, still reeling from the night's events, exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of what had transpired pressing heavily upon them. As the minutes ticked by, a new tension began to mount. Beatrice, who had been silent since the séance's chaotic climax, began to shift uncomfortably in her seat. Her fingers twitched sporadically, and her breathing grew erratic. The locket she had clutched so tightly earlier now dangled loosely from her grasp. Suddenly, her head snapped up, her eyes, once filled with sorrow, now blazed with an unsettling intensity. Her posture changed, her spine straightening, and her voice, when she spoke, was unlike her own. It was deeper, more resonant, and carried an air of authority that sent shivers down the spines of those present. "You think you can meddle with the spirits and walk away unscathed?" she boomed, her voice echoing through the hall. The guests recoiled in shock, their eyes fixed on Beatrice, or rather, the entity that now seemed to inhabit her. Jasper, ever the historian, was the first to find his voice. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Beatrice, or the spirit within her, smirked. "I am a voice from the past, a soul wronged and seeking justice." Clarence, the skeptic, scoffed. "This is some trick, some illusion," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. But the spirit was not to be deterred. "You, Clarence," it hissed, its gaze fixed on the journalist, "you come here seeking a story, but you have secrets of your own. Secrets you thought were buried deep." Clarence paled, his eyes darting around the room, seeking an escape. But the spirit continued, its voice dripping with malice. "Did you think you could hide your transgressions? That the spirits would not see?" The room was thick with tension, the guests' faces a mix of shock, disbelief, and fear. Lillian, the youngest of the group, began to sob, her body shaking with terror. But Madame Raymount, ever the protector, stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Beatrice. "Release her," she commanded, her voice steady. The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the hall. "You think you can command me?" it taunted. "You, who dared to open the portal, to meddle with forces beyond your comprehension." Madame Raymount's eyes blazed with determination. "I will not let you harm her," she vowed, her voice filled with resolve. The two locked eyes, a battle of wills playing out before the guests. The room grew colder, the candles flickering wildly, and a sense of foreboding settled over the room. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Beatrice, her body limp, collapsed to the floor, the spirit seemingly banished. The guests rushed to her side, their faces etched with concern. Madame Raymount, her energy spent, knelt beside Beatrice, her fingers brushing the young woman's forehead. "She is free," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "But we must be careful. The spirits are restless, and they will not be easily appeased." The guests nodded, their faces pale and drawn. They had come to the séance seeking answers, seeking closure. But what they found was a glimpse into the unknown, a journey into the heart of darkness. And as they made their way out of the mansion, they knew that they had come face to face with the spirits that roamed its halls. And they would never forget the night the voice within spoke. Chapter 6. Shadows of the past. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur and opulence, now stood as a testament to the thin veil separating the living from the departed. As dawn's first light filtered through the heavy drapes, the guests, weary from the night's events, tried to find solace in the promise of a new day. But the mansion had other plans. Jasper, ever the early riser, was the first to notice the apparitions. As he descended the grand staircase, he caught a glimpse of a figure in the corner of his eye. Turning, he was met with the sight of a woman, dressed in a gown from a bygone era, her face pale and her eyes filled with sorrow. She seemed to float, her feet barely touching the ground, and as Jasper watched, she vanished into thin air. Shaken, he rushed to inform the others. But as the guests gathered in the grand hall, it became clear that he was not the only one to have had an encounter. Lillian, her face pale, spoke of a child she had seen in the gardens. "He was playing with a ball," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But when I approached him, he looked up, and his eyes, they were empty, devoid of life." Clarence, the skeptic, scoffed. "It's just our minds playing tricks on us," he muttered. "There's no such thing as ghosts." But as the day wore on, it became clear that the mansion was teeming with spirits. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. The air grew cold, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Disturbances became the norm. Knocking sounds echoed through the halls, doors slammed shut on their own, and objects moved of their own accord. The mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Beatrice, still reeling from her possession, was the most affected. She spoke of a man she had seen in the library, his face twisted in rage. He was shouting, his voice filled with anger, she whispered. I tried to approach him, to calm him, but he vanished before my eyes. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. Madame Raymount, ever the protector, tried to maintain order. "We must stick together," she urged. "The spirits are restless, and they will feed off our fear." But as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. And as the guests tried to find a way out, to escape the clutches of the mansion, they came to a chilling realization. The mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered Chapter 7. Echoes of vengeance. The mansion's oppressive atmosphere had taken its toll on the guests, but none more so than Jasper and Clarence. As night fell, the two men found themselves ensnared in a web of supernatural torment that would test the limits of their sanity. Jasper, a man of history and logic, had always been fascinated by the mansion's storied past. But that night, as he lay in his ornate bed, the past came alive in a series of vivid, terrifying dreams. He found himself transported to a time long ago, witnessing events that seemed all too real. In his dream, he wandered the mansion's grand halls, the walls echoing with the laughter and chatter of a bygone era. But as he ventured deeper, the scenes grew darker. He witnessed a heated argument between a man and a woman, their voices rising in anger. The woman, her face twisted in rage, cursed the man, vowing revenge. Jasper watched in horror as the man, in a fit of rage, struck the woman down. He awoke with a start, his sheets drenched in sweat. The dream, though terrifying, had revealed a dark chapter in the mansion's history. A chapter that seemed to be repeating itself. Clarence, on the other hand, found himself the target of a series of eerie occurrences. It began with small accidents, a tripped rug, a broken glass. But as the days wore on, the incidents grew more sinister. He felt a presence watching him, stalking him. Every corner he turned, every room he entered, he felt eyes on him. One evening, as he was reading in the library, a book flew off the shelf, narrowly missing him. Startled, he looked around, but the room was empty. Later, as he was taking a bath, the water suddenly turned ice cold, and he felt hands pushing him under. Gasping for breath, he managed to pull himself out, his heart racing. But the most chilling incident occurred one night as he was walking back to his room. The dimly lit corridor seemed to stretch on forever, and as he walked, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he came face to face with a vengeful spirit. Its face, though distorted, was eerily familiar. It was the woman from Jasper's dream. The spirit, its eyes filled with rage, pointed a bony finger at Clarence. "You," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "You will pay for your ancestors' sins." Clarence, his face pale with fear, realized the truth. The man in Jasper's dream, the man who had struck down the woman, was his ancestor. And now, the vengeful spirit sought revenge. The group, already on edge, grew more divided. Suspicion and mistrust ran rampant, and accusations flew. Jasper, haunted by his dreams, tried to warn the others of the danger they were in. But Clarence, desperate to escape the spirit's wrath, grew more erratic, lashing out at anyone who dared to cross him. Madame Raymount, ever the voice of reason, tried to maintain order. "We must stick together," she urged. "The spirits are restless, and they will feed off our fear." But as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. As they made their way through its winding corridors, its grand halls, and its opulent rooms, they were met with manifestations at every turn. Apparitions appeared and disappeared at will, their faces etched with emotions ranging from sorrow to anger. Disturbances became the norm, and the once steady candles now flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And as the days turned into nights, the hauntings grew more intense. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, now stood as a testament to the spirits that roamed its halls. Its walls whispered tales of the past, its floors creaked with the weight of the departed, and its rooms echoed with the sounds of the unknown. The guests, their nerves frayed, began to turn on each other. Accusations flew, tensions mounted, and the once united group now stood divided. They realized that the mansion, with its rich history and its restless spirits, was alive. And it would not let them go. Chapter 8. Whispers from the ether. The mansion's grand hall, once a beacon of elegance and sophistication, had transformed into a theater of the supernatural. As the guests gathered, drawn by an inexplicable force, they bore witness to phenomena that defied the laws of nature. The first sign was subtle. A silver candelabra, resting on an ornate table, began to tremble. The candles, their flames steady moments ago, now danced wildly. Then, with a grace that belied its weight, the candelabra lifted off the table, hovering a few inches above. It rotated slowly in midair, casting eerie shadows on the walls, before gently settling back down. The room was silent, save for the collective gasps of the onlookers. Beatrice, her eyes wide with astonishment, whispered, "Did you all see that?" But before anyone could respond, another marvel unfolded. From the corners of the room, tiny orbs of light began to emerge. They glided effortlessly, leaving a trail of luminescence in their wake. These orbs, varying in size and color, danced around the guests, drawing patterns of light that seemed to tell a story. As they moved, a delicate fragrance filled the air, a mix of roses and an unknown, ancient scent that tugged at the memories of the older guests. Clarence, ever the skeptic, tried to find a logical explanation. "It's some sort of trick," he muttered, looking around for hidden wires or projectors. But even he couldn't deny the authenticity of what was unfolding. The grand piano, a relic from the 1800s, began to play on its own. A haunting melody filled the room, each note echoing with the sorrows and joys of a bygone era. But it wasn't just the music that captured the guests' attention. Upon the piano's polished surface, reflections of past residents of the mansion played out, scenes of grand balls, tender moments, and dark secrets. As the spectral recital continued, electronic devices carried by some of the guests began to malfunction. Lillian's digital recorder, initially brought to document the séance, now captured ghostly voices. When played back, amidst the static, whispered voices could be heard, each sharing fragments of their stories, their regrets, and their unfulfilled desires. Madame Raymount, sensing the energy in the room, cautioned the guests. "Do not fear them," she intoned. "They are merely trying to communicate, to share their stories. We must listen with open hearts." But not all were receptive. Jasper, already tormented by his nightmares, felt a growing sense of unease. "We're playing with forces we don't understand," he warned, his voice trembling. The room's temperature dropped suddenly, and a gust of wind blew through, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, the guests clung to each other, a mix of fear, awe, and desperation evident in their voices. Beatrice, her voice filled with wonder, whispered, "They're here, all around us." "Can you feel them?" Clarence, his skepticism shattered, murmured a prayer, hoping for protection from the unknown. As the minutes stretched on, the supernatural demonstrations intensified. Portraits on the walls shifted, their subjects' expressions changing from joy to sorrow. The chandelier above swayed, its crystals chiming in a ghostly harmony. And then, as suddenly as it began, the room returned to normal. The orbs vanished, the scents dissipated, and the electronic devices resumed their regular functions. The guests, shaken to their core, tried to process what they had witnessed. Some spoke in hushed tones, trying to find logical explanations, while others sat in stunned silence, their beliefs challenged. Madame Raymount, her face pale but composed, addressed the group. "The spirits have shared their messages. It is up to us to interpret and understand. We must respect their wishes and tread carefully." The mansion, with its rich history and restless spirits, had once again proven that the line between the living and the dead was thinner than anyone could have imagined. And as the guests retired to their rooms, they carried with them the weight of the night's events, each pondering the mysteries of the unknown. Chapter 9. Shadows of Lillian's past the morning sun streamed through the ornate windows of the mansion, casting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the chilling events of the previous night. The guests gathered in the drawing room, their faces etched with a mix of exhaustion and apprehension. The supernatural demonstrations had left them shaken, but it was the revelation of Lillian's past that would prove to be the most unsettling. Lillian, her face pale and her hands trembling, took a deep breath. "I need to tell you all something," she began, her voice quivering. "Something that I've kept hidden for far too long." She recounted a tale from her childhood, of a summer she had spent at the mansion with her grandmother. During that time, she had befriended a young boy named Samuel, who lived in the neighboring estate. Their bond was instant, and they spent countless hours exploring the vast grounds of the mansion, sharing secrets and dreams. One fateful day, while playing near the lake, tragedy struck. Samuel, attempting to retrieve a toy boat, had slipped into the water. Lillian, paralyzed by fear, had watched in horror as he struggled and eventually drowned. His body was recovered, but his spirit, it seemed, had never left. "I've always felt his presence," Lillian whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I believe he's the one causing all this chaos. He's angry at me for not saving him." The room was silent, the weight of Lillian's confession hanging heavily in the air. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, trying to process the revelation. Madame Raymount, her face a mask of sympathy, spoke up. Spirits often remain tethered to the living world due to unresolved emotions or unfinished business. Samuel's spirit is seeking closure, and Lillian, you are the key. Lillian nodded, her face contorted with guilt. I've tried to forget, to move on, but the memories haunt me. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face, hear his cries for help. I need to make things right. The group, realizing the gravity of the situation, began discussing a plan of action. They needed to confront Samuel's spirit, to communicate with him and hopefully find a way to appease him. Beatrice, her voice filled with determination, said, "We need to hold another séance, but this time, with Lillian at the center. She needs to face Samuel, to apologize and seek his forgiveness." Jasper, still shaken from his nightmares, added, "We need to be prepared. The last séance unleashed forces we couldn't control. We need to ensure everyone's safety." Madame Raymount agreed. "We'll need to take precautions. I have certain artifacts and rituals that can protect us from malevolent spirits. But remember, confronting a spirit, especially one with such strong emotions, is unpredictable. We must be united in our intentions." The guests, realizing the importance of the task ahead, pledged their support. They would stand by Lillian, helping her confront the shadows of her past and hopefully bring peace to both her and Samuel. As night fell, the group gathered once again in the grand hall. Candles were lit, protective circles drawn, and ancient incantations recited. Lillian, her heart heavy with guilt and fear, took her place at the center, ready to face the spirit of her childhood friend. The room grew cold, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. And as Madame Raymount began the séance, the boundaries between the living and the dead began to blur, setting the stage for a confrontation that would determine the fate of both Lillian and the restless spirit of Samuel. Chapter 10. The curse unveiled. The séance had ended, but the mansion's atmosphere remained thick with tension. The guests, their faces pale and eyes wide, tried to process the revelations of the night. But as they began to discuss the events, a new discovery would plunge them deeper into the mansion's dark history. Beatrice, while exploring a dusty corner of the library, stumbled upon an old leather-bound book. Its pages, yellowed with age, contained handwritten notes and sketches. As she leafed through it, a particular entry caught her eye. It spoke of a curse placed upon the mansion, a curse that bound restless spirits to its walls, preventing them from finding peace. The origins of the curse traced back to the mansion's early days. A scorned lover, heartbroken and vengeful, had invoked dark forces to ensure that any spirit tethered to the mansion would remain trapped, unable to move on. The curse was said to amplify the spirit's emotions, leading to heightened paranormal activity and manifestations. Beatrice, realizing the significance of her discovery, rushed to share it with the group. As they gathered around the book, the weight of their situation became clear. The curse was the root of their troubles, and unless they found a way to break it, they would remain at the mercy of the restless spirits. Madame Raymount, her face grave, spoke up. "I've heard whispers of this curse in spiritualist circles. It's said to be one of the most potent and unyielding. But there are ways, rituals that might break it. However, they come with great risks." The group, desperate for a solution, agreed to attempt the rituals. They would need to gather specific artifacts, recite ancient incantations, and most importantly, confront the spirits head-on. The mansion, with its sprawling rooms and hidden chambers, held many secrets. As the guests split up to search for the required artifacts, they encountered remnants of the mansion's past. Old letters, faded photographs, and personal belongings told tales of love, betrayal, and tragedy. Jasper, while searching the attic, found an old locket containing a portrait of a young woman. Her eyes, filled with sadness, seemed to follow him. As he pocketed the locket, a cold breeze swept through the room, and he heard a faint whisper, "Free us." Meanwhile, Clarence, in the mansion's underground cellar, discovered a sealed chest. Inside, he found a collection of ritualistic tools, their purpose clear. They were instruments of dark magic, used to invoke and bind spirits. With the artifacts gathered, the group reconvened in the grand hall. Madame Raymount, drawing upon her vast knowledge, began the ritual. The room grew cold, and an oppressive silence settled. As the incantations grew louder, the boundaries between the living and the dead began to blur. Spirits, some familiar and others long forgotten, emerged from the shadows. They circled the group, their faces contorted with a mix of anger and desperation. At the center of the whirlwind of apparitions stood the spirit of the scorned lover, her eyes burning with rage. Lillian, drawing upon newfound courage, stepped forward. "We seek to break the curse, to free you and all the spirits bound to this mansion. Let us help you find peace." The spirit, her voice echoing with centuries of pain, replied, "The curse was my doing, my revenge. But I too am trapped, bound by my own dark magic. Break the curse, and free us all." The ritual reached its climax, the energy in the room palpable. As Madame Raymount recited the final incantation, a blinding light filled the room. The spirits, one by one, began to fade, their forms dissolving into the ether. The curse, after centuries of torment, was finally broken. The mansion, once a beacon of darkness and despair, now stood silent and at peace. The guests, their ordeal over, shared a moment of quiet reflection. They had faced the unknown, confronted their fears, and emerged victorious. As dawn broke, the group, forever bound by their shared experience, left the mansion. The spirits, now free, had found their peace. And the mansion, its dark history finally laid to rest, stood as a testament to the power of hope, redemption, and the human spirit. Chapter 11. Dawn's new light. The first rays of dawn painted the horizon in hues of gold and pink, casting a gentle light upon the mansion. The once foreboding structure now seemed serene, its dark past replaced by a newfound tranquility. Birds chirped merrily, and the wind rustled the leaves, creating a melody that spoke of hope and rebirth. Inside, the guests slowly emerged from their rooms, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and contemplation. The grand hall, which had been the epicenter of the previous night's supernatural storm, was now bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. The remnants of the rituals, the candles, the ancient book, the scattered artifacts, lay as silent witnesses to the events that had transpired. Beatrice, her eyes red from a sleepless night, approached the large window overlooking the gardens. "It's hard to believe," she murmured, "that this place, so calm and beautiful now, was the scene of such chaos." Jasper, joining her, nodded in agreement. "It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a dawn waiting to break." One by one, the guests began to prepare for their departures. Luggage was packed, rooms were checked, and farewells were exchanged. Each guest, though eager to leave the mansion's haunting memories behind, couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. Clarence, his skepticism forever shattered, shared his thoughts with the group. "I came here seeking answers, and while I found them, I also discovered something more profound. The thin line between the living and the dead, the power of redemption, and the importance of confronting our past. Lillian, her face reflecting a newfound peace, added, "We were brought here for a reason. To face our fears, to find closure, and to help free those trapped by the curse. We leave with a deeper understanding of the mysteries of life and death." As the guests made their way to the entrance, Madame Raymount, the enigmatic medium who had guided them through the ordeal, stood waiting. Her face, usually composed, now bore a hint of sadness. Beatrice, sensing her turmoil, asked, "What will you do now, madam?" "Will you stay here?" Madame Raymount sighed, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "This mansion has been a part of my life for so long. But after last night, I feel it's time to move on. There are other places, other spirits that need my help." The guests, understanding her decision, expressed their gratitude. "You helped us face our fears," Jasper said, his voice filled with emotion. "We'll never forget you." Madame Raymount smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And I'll never forget any of you. Remember, the spirit world is always closer than you think. Stay open, stay curious, and always trust your instincts." With final farewells exchanged, the guests departed, leaving the mansion and its memories behind. The once grand structure, now free from its dark past, stood as a beacon of hope and redemption. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light upon the mansion, a soft breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it whispers of the spirits who had once roamed its halls. And in the distance, a figure, cloaked in shadows, watched the mansion, hinting at mysteries yet to be uncovered. The end, or is it? We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.